Hey, James. How are you, sir? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm doing great, Tom. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And we will call you James because Jim is your dad, apparently.
That's right. My dad is Jim, and I've always been James, or for some reason, everyone still calls me Jim, but it doesn't shorten it. I've never understood that. It's the same number of syllables. Just call me James, right? Yeah.
I just heard a great one. World Wide Web. How many syllables is that?
Should be three,
How many
right?
how many syllables is www?
Oh, so many. All right. Is it
Nine.
nine? I was going to say it's at least eight, right? Yeah. W.
It's
Yeah.
it's
Wow.
it's triple, right? And yet we say www as if
www.
it's
Right.
faster.
Although we meld it together, it becomes this like mush. We don't actually speak out the W. It's blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
That's great.
That's our brain, our subconscious brain saying, "Hey, dummy,
Yeah.
stop saying it the long way. I'll
This
do
has
it
got
for
to get
you."
shorter. I can't do this every day. That's
Mhm.
right. Yeah.
um, so besides that, we wanted to talk about your expertise. You wrote a fascinating book called "Living a Rich Life," and there's very few books that I'll read kind of front to cover in a day or two, and yours is one of those. So hats off to you. Partially
Thank you.
because it's not terribly thick for our audience.
It's a huge reason why people
I'm
finish it.
holding it. I'm holding it up. It's 160 pages roughly, so that makes it digestible. But more importantly, you cover some pretty cool topics, some really interesting perspectives and mindset around money
Mm,
in a way that I think is very values based and truly is about living a deep, meaningful life. You know, a rich life in that regard.
yeah.
So why don't you we'll go through some of these concepts because I think the leaders out there listening, the CEOs out there listening, will be pretty enlightened and or confronted by some of these concepts. I know I was, and so where should we start? What's the most provocative? One of the most provocative ideas in your work and in your book.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's so interesting is when we wrote the book, the idea really was, hey, I want to make sure everybody actually finishes it. I don't want to just keep blathering on for 250 pages. I want them to actually get done with it because I want them to get this wisdom that I've gotten to glean by walking life with hundreds and hundreds of families over the years. And what I learned is that money and regret both compound, and everybody's focusing on the money part. They think that the goal is just compound as much money as possible. And what they're missing is that they're also compounding deep, painful regret that actually can get a lot bigger than the pile of money you're making. And the biggest way I see that is that people are trading relationships for money and they don't recognize that they're doing that. And every time that I bring it up, everybody says, "Oh gosh, no, I would never. That sounds horrible. How would anyone do that?" And my answer is we all do it all the time and we don't even recognize it. And the concept that I talk about in the book that's mostly related to this is this idea of the lure and the lie, that there's these two forces pulling on us at all times. And the lure is the lure of more. It's this idea that just a little bit more, just a little more security, just a little more stuff, that'll be where we will feel better. And the reason why that happens, by the way, is because we experience life in the marginal change. So everything that is currently normal disappears. What feels different is that next level of new, which is why we're constantly being marketed to. Like, you need this next upgrade, you need the next experience of the new gadget because it feels new and it's exciting. Everything else is normal. And so the lure of more is this, what I think of as like longshore drift. You go to the beach, you plant your umbrella in the sand and you get in the waves and you start splashing around. At some point, you look back and you say, "Where's my stuff?" And you've drifted 150 yards down the beach. You never intended to go sideways; it just happened. And that's what happens with couples all the time, where their marginal cost is the way they experience buying that next marginal new thing. So that next car is only slightly more monthly payment. The next house is only a little bit more mortgage payment. That next promotion is only 1 or 2 more days a month of travel. Everything is just this marginal change that doesn't feel like it costs much because we don't really fully experience what we're sacrificing today because we're used to it. So that next change is all we're experiencing. Then at some point they pop up and they go, we never intended to be working this much. We never intended to be this disconnected from the stuff that matters. How did we get here? And it's because that lure of more was just slowly pulling them away from what they really cared about. But the second force is really interesting. And your audience in particular, I think, falls prey to it. And that's the lie of being irreplaceable.
Well, let's hold off on that one for a
Okay.
second. We'll keep the audience in dramatic suspense.
That's
We'll
great.
have to keep listening to get to the irreplaceable and
Yeah.
stick with this first concept. I love you're clearly a finance guy. You use words like margin as if everyone uses those words.
That's awesome.
um, so I love the idea that that margin, the difference between where we are and sort of the new thing. In my case, the new thing I bought at Costco that I don't really need is new, and it's kind of got this appeal to it because of that. And
Yep.
that's the margin that you're talking about. And it's so easy to just kind of fall into that
Yep.
trap. I remember being at Costco about 6 months ago and literally forcing myself to take something out of the cart and put it back on the shelf.
Mm,
It was nothing short of agony, which is ridiculous, right? Like as you think about it, it's lunacy. And yet I was literally like struggling to put this whatever it was, $12 item back on the shelf just as an exercise in like self-discipline, right?
yeah.
I'm a professional life coach. I should be pretty good at that. And it was so hard to do that. So what's going on in the brain, you think? What's
Yeah.
happening that makes this stuff so hard to get our hands around?
The thing that's so fascinating about that is there's been I'm a huge behavioral finance junkie. Like I'm reading all the behavioral finance studies that I can get my hands on because I think we've been assuming that money is mathematical and that the reason why people need guys like me is because the math is really complicated. It's not actually. It's pretty straightforward. It's math. The hard part is that money is emotional. It's relational. It's where all that humanness gets mixed up. It's not that none of that is actually formulaic. It's all really experiential and inconsistent. But one of the things about things that's so fascinating is this idea called hedonic adaptation, which is a really fancy way to say that things become familiar over time. And that's actually why they lose value. So you buy the new gadget, and at the beginning, you get that rush of this is new, this is different. My phone, when I first got my phone, I could turn my face into a unicorn and text my kids as a unicorn. And it was so cool for a week. And now it's just my phone, right? I don't even think about the value that it brings because it's just this thing that I'm used to. And so part of the reason why we're always hungry for new is because that's what actually feels valuable. We get used to the things we already have. It's ironically the reason why experiences are always worth more than things. And we have a hard time registering that because we look at experiences and we're like, yeah, but that trip to Disney costs more than the car that's sitting in my driveway that I could sell. How on earth is that trip that's vapor that lasts for a week worth more than this thing that actually does have tangible value? And the reason is because it gets less familiar. We have to bring it back. We have to reminisce and tell stories and share memories about it. And it becomes deeply valuable to us that we share that experience together because it loses its familiarity, which doesn't make sense on the surface, but we intuitively know that shared experiences with our family are valuable. But when we're faced between buy that vacation or buy that new minivan because the old minivan is struggling, we'll pick the minivan over the vacation because it's tangible and it's backwards.
And what is it called? Hedonic what?
Hedonic adaptation.
What's the I get the hedonic part. What's the adaptation part?
It's the fact that we adapt to hedonism. If you really break it down, we get used to whatever that new feeling is of that hedonistic pleasure fades because we adapt to it. So we need a new hit and a new hit. So
Even if
yeah,
it's not sort of the more extreme version of hedonic behavior,
yes,
hedonism. It could be as simple as my $12 Costco purchase
It's exactly right. It's
because
exactly right.
it fulfills that pleasure need that I have.
Yep. Yep.
And what's below that? If we keep digging even deeper, and
Mhm.
there's some fear there that we're trying to grapple with, or we're trying to fill some void.
Yeah. I think what most people get stuck in is this perpetual cycle of medicating negative emotion with money. A lot of times it's money that they don't have, which is why we have a huge credit card, debt burden in this country, because the pain of paying that credit card payment is less painful than the pain of feeling inadequate or insignificant or like a failure or bored. And so we medicate that negative emotion by using money to purchase what we think is an experience, but it's actually just a thing. And that actually is the way that the marketing agencies have been tricking us. Like they knew this forever. We're just kind of figuring it out. But if you notice, to go back to the phone illustration, you never see a TV commercial or an ad on the web that's promoting a product that is framing it in its tangible state. In other words, they don't talk about the iPhone in terms of how fast the chip is or how much memory it has or any of that kind of detail. The ad is a beautiful person having a beautiful experience holding that thing. And we think we're buying an experience when we're buying that thing because we saw that experience, and that's what we're craving is experiences. Marketing agencies know experiences are what matter. So they turn their thing into an experience and promise that experience. And that's what we're buying. Like, oh, that'll make me feel better. And then it's
And
just a thing and
and
it doesn't feel better.
ironically, we spend our vacations on our phone looking down and missing the experience that we bought the
Yes,
phone for in the first place.
exactly. That's right. Yeah, we end up stuck into this email jungle on the thing that isn't actually giving us any experience that we like. Yeah, that's so funny. That's great.
Interesting. So this idea of money and regret
Mhm.
compounding. In the case of money, most people know, most of our audience, I would assume, knows that you save money now, you put it in the bank, you invest it, it compounds, and it adds up, and it's amazing how quickly. I remember when I was in sixth grade, I had a paper out, and my dad gave me a one sheet of paper, and it was basically a chart that showed if you save this many dollars per day
Mhm.
over this period of time at a 7% return, you'll be worth X amount in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And I remember thinking as a kid, I could be a millionaire by
Yeah.
the time I'm in my 30s if I just save, I forget what the dollar amount was, but it was not that big.
Yeah,
I
it
was like,
doesn't take much.
I could probably do that with my paper route. And it was this life-changing experience and lesson in compounding money.
Yep.
So that concept, I think, is probably pretty broadly understood, although we suck at doing it by and large as a society, which is why our debts are so high and whatnot.
Right.
All
Right.
the way to the top, all the way to the presidency.
Yes.
Um, but what's this idea of compounding relationship or compounding regret? What's that
Yeah.
all about?
Yeah, the thing that happens in the regret space is that we keep throwing this pain on a pile of pain. And so we choose to take the promotion because it's going to get us further along in our career. I'm going to get status, I'm going to get power, I'm going to get a raise, whatever. And in that choice, we move further away from our spouse and our kids. Or in that choice, we move further into a workaholism problem that then perpetuates itself. And those regrets compound in that now we feel like we have to somehow make it up. So now we're going to work harder to make more money. I had this conversation with a client where they were saying, if I just get to here, then I can get to there. And if I just do, 15 days of travel, then I could get to here. And if I do all that, then I'll be able to pay for my kids to go to school. I'll be able to pay for my kids' college. If I just take all these steps, then I'll give it back to them. Right. And what I find is the hardest truth that those individuals face when they get to the end of that cycle is they were working so hard to get something that the people that love them never wanted, right? If I were able to sit that person down and say, all right, let's talk to your kids and ask them, hey, I'm going to make a deal with you. You're going to not know me. I'm going to not be able to call out your identity or give you any confidence or leadership. I'm probably not going to be a huge part of your life, but you'll get to go to college for free. Or option two, I will be present. I will be connected to you. I will make an impact in who you are, and you will be known, and you'll have some student loans. Which one do you think they'd pick? But we're picking for them. And a lot of times we're picking the one they don't want. And the pain then really gets to this compounded level when the person retires after spending all of their time working to buy back what this thing was costing, somehow make it up to their family. And then when they retire, they walk in the door. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this. They walk in the door to a spouse that's learned how to live without them, and they don't know what to do. They don't know what it looks like to share experiences and that freedom of retirement. And that person, unfortunately, ends up crawling back into work because that's the only place they feel safe. And it's just devastating to watch these 70-something-year-olds that had all these dreams of what their life was going to look like, and they're still working because they don't have an option of anything else. They don't know what else to do with themselves. And I'm not old school, like retirement means you never work again. I think that's changing, and I love that. I think we are called to be productive. I think it's a good thing. But this over focus on achievement and production at a level where it actually costs the things that are irreplaceable, that's when it's crossing the line, and those regrets just keep compounding, and the cost of those decisions hurt even more over time. And this all hit me. I'm sitting across the table from a client who's 80. And we had this really sweet moment where he was telling me all the things he wished he'd done differently. And then 10 minutes later, I'm sitting across the table from a 30-year-old who's telling me all the things they're about to do and why they make all the sense in the world and they're absolutely the right decision. And I'm like, oh, I just talked to you as an 80-year-old 10 minutes ago. And that guy would tell you that everything you're about to do is what he wished he'd never done. So what are you going to do with that? Like, how do we change it? How do we get ahead of that? That's really the mission I'm on, is trying to get ahead of some of that trend. Because a lot of times people will stand up in their 80s and say, don't do what I did. And everybody will say, yeah, but you did it. We all have to do it. There's no alternative. And I'm trying to figure out a path for that alternative. What does it look like for us to stay connected to the stuff that matters and still compound money? But my bigger role is preventing them from compounding regret. That's what I care about more.
Yeah, because in those cases, it's there. The counter argument is, well, yeah, you're 80 and you're a multimillionaire. Like it's
Right.
easy for you to say
Right.
you wouldn't do it again, but I'm not a multimillionaire and I got a lot of work to do.
That's right.
So what do you say in that case?
Yeah, I think the key in my experience is having a really clear vision for what enough looks like. What is enough? What is the end target? If we can craft a really clear vision of where we're really trying to get to, because the assumption is always, well, the answer is just more, right? I mean, John D. Rockefeller, uh, somebody asked him when he had already amassed an absolute insane fortune, how much money is enough? And he said, just a little bit more. And it was kind of tongue in cheek and funny, but I think it was pretty obvious that that actually is really how he thinks. But we don't know where to draw the line because we just assume it's always better to have more. Where if we can back into, just like the illustration you had, Tom, where you say, if I save this much, I'll be a millionaire. So I'm just going to save this much. Like if I just keep doing the discipline and the diligence, then that'll take care of itself. And that means the rest of this, I don't need more because I'm already on track. So I can start to say no to things that are pulling me further into, up, further up and further to the right. If we can get to this place where we say, no, this is great. This is contentment. This is satisfaction. And I'm on track and I can have confidence, then we're free to be much more intentional with the things that matter. But we've never cast that vision. So we'll always assume we're under, resourced. We haven't done enough. We got to do more because we don't even know what we're aiming at. And that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, and we'll get into lifestyle cap in a second, but I think which is a really cool concept from your book. But the first thing you said, I think, was we need to have the discipline
Yep.
to be intentional about our savings. Basically, that we need to have an intentional plan and then stick to it. Which again, we're not terribly good at because we see the next thing, we see the
That's
country
right.
club, that we want to join or the new car, and so it's like, oh, I'll save more next year. So what's your advice there? How do we create that discipline to just stick to a plan? Because over a 30-year period, it is amazing how much money can build up.
Yeah, I think the biggest missing piece in so many people's lives is some sort of family vision, some sense of what we're trying to accomplish. What does it look like for us to look at the year that we're living this year and say, well done. This was exactly on target. This is what we intended. Because if we bring no intentionality to the day, then we're completely subject to emotional whims and, ooh, that car's nice. I think I'll just go buy it. Right. We make quick decisions that are emotional with no reference point to what we've decided ahead of time. And so having some of that decision in place intentionally, before you walk into the year, before you walk into the next 5 years, you know exactly kind of what this thing is and what it looks like. Define success differently than just I have more money. But it really leads to, uh, I think, the idea of the lie of being irreplaceable. If you're okay with going into that conversation.
No, James, nice try though. That was good.
You're not going to let me go there.
We're gonna keep the audience suspended here because I want to touch on something that I think is within that thread. This having this family vision. I didn't
Yeah.
really think about it that way, but my wife, who is a finance nerd,
Mhm.
also, and so we've just always done that. We've always talked about it, and we actually call it a center meeting where we
Mm. Yep.
when we first got married, we met about every quarter, but then it was every 6 months, and then it's every year, and now it's every couple of years. But we're literally, in our case, centering our
Mhm.
lives around God,
Yep.
and then family and friends, and on and on. But then we're also talking about what's the financial discipline we need to fulfill some of those dreams. And we've been very intentional
Yep.
and have accomplished all of our dreams as far as that goes. And so
It's
it's
huge.
not that hard. It just takes some intentionality and a few hours every few months to do this. And so for the CEOs out there, I
Yep.
think it's important that they lead by example, that they're doing that first, and then helping your employees. There's a great book out there by Matthew Kelly called Dream Manager,
Oh, yes. That's a
that,
great book.
that I
Yep.
sent to you, and
Yes.
and and for the CEOs out there, I'd highly recommend you read it because it's a whole different way of thinking about retention and about keeping your best employees. It's a good book. It won't be as good as the one that Brad and I are writing about the great engagement and coming out in a few months. But Matthew Kelly is pretty decent. He's sold a few million copies more
Few
than we
million.
have.
Yeah. I think he's done
Yeah.
all right with it. Yeah.
Um, but he gets into how do we help our employees fulfill their dreams. How do we create a sort of a financial discipline, help our employees create that same financial discipline. So what's your advice there, and then I'll finally let you get into the topic you want to talk about.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And we actually have a family vision course that we offer for free for anybody that wants to go through it. And really, it is interesting to me, particularly when we're talking to an audience of business leaders. I mean, how much time do we spend on mission and vision for our companies? And then how much time have you spent on mission and vision for your family? How much more important is it that your family knows where they're going? Right. And so what we've set out, and there's lots of different processes here, but what we've set out is that, if you establish a mission statement or a vision statement, whatever you want to call it, for your family, but wrap that with four or so values, right? So we have, four values, and we tend to frame them in a we will statement. So in our family vision, for example, our four values is: we will be authentic and sincere, we will live in deep relationship, we will remain steadfast in Christ, and we will lift the burdens of others. Those are our four values. So now the beautiful thing is my mom cross stitched this beautiful piece that has those values and has our mission statement up on our kitchen wall. And when my kids come and they say, hey, I think I want to do this thing, I just point and say, how does it fit? I don't have to say no. If they say, oh, this is going to help me lift the burdens of others, I have to say yes. But if they look at those 4 values and they're like, yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with those things, it's like, well, then we're not doing it. Right. So it frames our decision making for everybody in the family. It's not just me and my wife, it's our kids. It's this, as we go into the next year, how are we going to lift the burdens of others? How are we going to live in deep relationship? What does that look like? How are we going to intentionally move towards these things in the next 12 months? When you have that reference point, that's a fun conversation. Because then you can look back and say, man, we nailed it. We did these things. Man, we need to do a little more of this next year. This one felt a little like we missed it. That's okay. But we at least know what we're aiming at. And that is 99% of the problem. We just don't know what we're aiming at. So we never feel like we're hitting it. And so, yeah, that's the biggest hill to climb more than anything when it comes to this stuff, is just getting the target right.
Yeah, and helping people to focus on the right things. It's
Mm-hmm.
not rocket science, but it does take intentional thought process. And I just wrote down, it's a great idea. I think we could add to our work, is encouraging people to think about what are their family values. We're not big into vision statements and mission statements because they're not worth much, especially in organizations.
Yep.
Because most of the time it's compliance driven. It's not genuine, heartfelt commitment. That's where we miss the mark. It's a big difference between having a mission statement and being on a mission.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's
the
good.
job of leadership is to get people on a mission, and that they genuinely care about.
Well,
But
and we've
let's
done that with Wealthquest. We brought that in, where we are leaders, we are pioneers, we are servants, and we are advocates, right? So it's these identity statements that are about who we are and how we're going to care for people. And they need to be broad enough that everything can fit under there. Like and by the way, I've never seen anyone in a family mission or vision statement that they've put together have one of their values be, I will be vice president of Muckety Mucks, or I will achieve, assistant executive director of blah, blah, blah. That never makes it. It's never actually what matters. And yet we end up getting sucked into, that's all that matters. I got to get there. When you really pull yourself out of that system and you start to ask yourself questions around what your family's trying to achieve, those things never make it on the list.
Hmm. I love it. I love it. All right. I'm resisting the temptation to go down another tangent here. So I'll let you I'll let you finally get to this topic you want to talk about. So go ahead, jump in.
That's awesome. Well, I can always tie into it somehow. So that particular statement, even that I just made, that people don't have, I will achieve, executive vice muckety muck, that never makes it. But it ends up being the thing we end up aiming at. And that's because we've fallen prey to that second force that causes us to trade relationships for money, that lie of being irreplaceable. And it's a rip current. It pulls us away really quickly from the things that actually matter to us. And what happens is we hear a story, and that story sounds something like, you're the only one that can do it. You're the only one that can lead this team, manage this project, close this deal. We need you. And the problem is that story is so intoxicating. I almost like picture Pepe Le Pew with the scent floating over him, and he's like floating towards the scent of the cat, right? This unbelievable draw towards this sense of superhero and importance and status and significance. We just keep getting sucked further into it, and we turn to our spouse and our kids, and we say, "You don't understand. They need me. I'm the only one that can do it. I have to go." And they can't compete with us in that space. Like my kids can't say, well, Dad, you've been such a good dad this quarter. We're going to go ahead and promote you to an executive vice president of fatherhood. We're going to give you a bonus this quarter. We're really happy with how you're showing up. I'm just dad. They have nothing to offer me. And yet at the same time, I am infinitely more confident in my work role. I've trained for this. I've done it for 22 years. I've lived this life. I know exactly how to tell people how to handle their money. I've walked so many of these paths with so many families. I am really confident. I have never raised a 16-year-old boy before. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so if I'm honest, I would rather do the thing that I feel is in my wheelhouse and that I feel totally prepared for. I am always feeling inadequate as a husband and a father. And so I'm drawn to the thing where I feel adequate and confident. And so this lie of being irreplaceable pulls us further into this identity that I matter, I'm the only one that can do it, I have to do it. And yet I'm 100% confident that there are thousands and thousands of people in the city of Cincinnati that could do my job. And many of them could probably do it better than I can. But there is no one else on this planet that can be a husband to my wife and a father to my kids. That is the place I truly am irreplaceable, and I'm leaving it. I'm trading it to go chase something that anybody could do. And we end up, that is probably one of the biggest points of compounded regret that I see, is that people realize when the machine keeps running without them, when they retire and the door closes, and there was cake in the conference room and there was an attaboy or two on the way out, but they never actually needed them. Anybody could have done it. And then they step back into a home where they weren't there. They were not present, and the cost comes crashing down on them. And that's my biggest heart cry, is to convince people you're not that important. There's thousands of people that could do your job. Know that. Fully accept that. And just delight in it, actually. Like, get to a place of freedom where you go, oh, okay, I'm not that big of a deal. It's so helpful. But then you recognize you're the only one that can be a dad or a mom. You want to get in there more. You want to play that role more intentionally, and that's the key.
There's that, and there's that regret that all of a sudden you're saying, "Whoa, where did that come from?" Decades of piled up regret.
Yep, that's right.
Well, we're past our time, but I do want to touch on the lifestyle cap because I think it
Sure.
is such a cool concept. So maybe
Yeah.
give us the short version because I think it's something that our listeners can go and do immediately because
Yeah.
it's that powerful and simple.
Well, and yeah, and it's a great kind of summary of all the things we talked about today. And that, when you think about how do we fight against the lure of more and the lie of being irreplaceable, how do we get to a place where we're intentional? Um, if we have a family vision, we know this is where we're aiming. And if we establish then this is contentment, we draw the line. And in my world, that line is including what you're giving, some level of discipline to give to charity, some level of travel and fun, some level of spending on yourself, as well as saving for your future, being fully prepared to hit your retirement target. Like, we're not talking rice and beans and austerity. We're talking this is great. This feels really good. Draw that line. Every year as we walk into the year, my wife and I sit down and we go, all right, how are we going to live in deep relationships? How many trips are we going to take and who we taking with us? How are we going to do this well? What are we going to do to lift burdens of others? And what is it going to take for us to give to the causes and the things that we really care about? What about this? What about that? We work through all that and we draw that line. This year, it's going to take X. And we don't skimp. We're not denying ourselves. We're living a very enjoyable, delightful life, but we've drawn the line. And then all throughout the year, if more than that comes in, we set it aside into what I call the abundance fund, which is the opposite of the emergency fund, right? The emergency fund is, what if things go poorly? I got to protect myself. But we don't tend to have an answer to the opposite question. What if things go well? Well, normally our answer is I'll just spend it on myself. But if we set it aside, then we're ready to give it. We're ready to just lift burdens, help people be connected to families in pain and make the pain go away. We can just act in the moment. But that's only available to us if we've drawn the line to say this is enough. And what it does is it takes away all the teeth When the lure of more comes along and says, yeah, but if you had more, you can say, nope, I don't need any more. I've already decided what contentment looks like. This is enough. And when the lie of being irreplaceable comes along and says, no, we need you to close this deal, you can say, nope, anybody can do my job. I already have enough. This is enough. I don't need to chase the next thing. And it feels so anti-American, just to be clear. But it is so freeing to have already established what your intention is and what enough looks like. And that includes preparing for your future, taking care of yourself, enjoying yourself. All that stuff's already built in. So all of the tricks that the marketing agencies are using to try to pull more of your money away from you, you can go, no, I don't need that. It's such a simple concept. It is not easy to pull off, but if you can commit to it, it changes everything because we stop chasing that next thing.
And that is the ultimate form of freedom that we all desire,
Yes.
that we don't
Yes.
realize is so close to our grasps.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
I know from reading the book that it also creates some really cool opportunities where your kids are coming to you and saying, "Hey, can we use some of the money from the abundance fund to help this family or to help this kid over here?" And like, boom,
Yep.
creates a great opportunity to further the values.
Yep.
Um, we won't get into that. If you want more, folks, go read "Living a Rich Life" by James Lenhoff and your partner G.E. Williams.
Yep.
Great stuff. And James, thanks for the time today. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me, Tom. Really enjoyed the conversation.